Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the I-5 Rose Quarter Improvement Project's Historic Albina Advisory Board. My name is Erica Warren, and I have the privilege of facilitating this distinct group of community volunteers and board directors. It is 4 p.m. Tuesday, October 8th, and we are going to give HAAB members and others just a few more moments to join us in the virtual space. So we appreciate your patience and we'll be with you very shortly. Thank you. Again, thank you to all of you who have joined us in the virtual space for the I-5 Rose Quarter Improvement Project's Historic Albina Advisory Board. We are going to give HAAB members just a moment to transition into the virtual space, and we will get the meeting underway in just a little bit. I'm going to give folks just one more minute before we get going, getting some of our HAB members a chance to transition from other work meetings that may have gone a little longer. So thank you for your patience. Natalie and Isabel, if you would put our slides I would appreciate it. Welcome to everyone in the virtual space. Again, my name is Erica Warren, and we are about to embark on our 34th meeting for the I-5 Rose Quarter Improvement Project's Historic Albina Advisory Board. Thank you for joining us in the space for this very important work. Next slide, please. If you're experiencing technical difficulties, which you may, please avail yourself to the number on the screen. Next slide, please. Tonight's meeting is very exciting as we'll be diving into some work that community members have been looking forward to beginning the discussion around. We will begin our evening with public comment and then project updates, and then move into the really exciting work from the Echo Northwest team in regards to preliminary economic analysis for development on the cover. After that, we will hear from our colleagues at the city, and then we will have some final steps before we adjourn our meeting. Next slide, please. I see many HAAB members entering into the virtual space. So as they get settled in, I want to remind us of our principal agreement. Your voice matters. We're looking forward to hearing from all of our HAAB members, community members, as well as those who will be joining us for public comment. We trust you'll be authentic and genuine. We ask that you would listen for understanding and to deal with issues and not people. This is a passionate project in regards to many issues that we are trying to remedy, work through, and collaborate together on. So we ask you to deal with issues and not people. We want to stay not personal in regards to our engagement. We know that there may be some discomfort in the work that we're doing together, but we ask that you would remain respectfully engaged in the work. For those who can, keep your cameras on. We'd love to engage with you directly in that way, though we understand the climate and working in the virtual space, you may have to turn off your camera. We realize it has taken us a long time to get here, so we ask you to expect and accept that we won't fix or solve everything in today's meeting, but always looking forward to that next step, to making progress and moving the needle forward. Next slide, please. For today, as usual, we will have an opportunity for members of the broader community to comment in this meeting. I'm going to now turn it over to my colleague, Natalie, who will help us through our public comment portion.
Thanks, Erica. Members of the public viewing the meeting on the live stream are invited to make verbal public comment by phone at this time. And if you wish to do so, you can dial the number that's shown on the slide here, and then enter the meeting ID and passcode shown below it. After doing so, you'll be placed in a virtual waiting room until your turn to speak. And when the time comes, we will invite you to unmute yourself and say your comment. Speakers will have up to 2 minutes for their comment and will be muted at time. And if you'd like to provide more extensive comments to members of the HAAB, please see the options listed on the meeting agenda. To call in now, dial 971-247-1195 and enter meeting ID 821-9556-3505. Then enter passcode 750017 and dial *9 to raise your hand and then *6 to unmute yourself. And please remember, if you're joining us on the live stream while calling in, remember to mute your speakers to minimize feedback. And so with that, I'm checking to see if we have any members of the public wishing to make a comment, and I'm not seeing any at this time. So we can give it another minute, Erica, and I'm still not seeing anyone there. So
Okay.
yeah.
Well, Natalie, thank you so much. We are well into our agenda, so thank you again. Please, members of the broader public, if you're joining us on the live stream, feel free if you have comments to submit via the email or phone number that's been provided. We thank you for joining in the work. Next slide, please. With that, I am going to turn it over to our project director, Ms. Megan Channel, to give us some updates on the project. Megan?
Thanks, Erica, and good afternoon, HAAB members. I've got a number of updates for you today on funding and status of grant awards, partnerships, and our HAAB engagement look ahead. But before I jump in directly to those project updates, I do want to acknowledge the recent conversations and coverage regarding the project, including the HAAB and our project team. So in light of that, I just want to first and foremost continue to give a thank you to our Historic Albina Advisory Board, because without your engagement and support, we frankly wouldn't be at this point of project success. Two key things: we have an approved environmental document, and we're the recipient of the largest federal grant from the Reconnecting Communities program nationally. So the HAAB was instrumental to getting us to this point. And complementing this HAAB's leadership, we have our strong partnerships with the City of Portland and Albina Vision Trust, which have been critical to setting us up for success. So I just want to be really clear that I personally and professionally value the time and expertise that each of you bring as HAAB members and to our partners that you continue to bring into this process. And in addition to our HAAB and our partners, we have a strong and large team supporting the project, delivering a project to meet the community value as best we can. And so we have a dedicated and large team supported by many consultant firms. We have over 200, we have over 24 firms moving this work forward. With the HAAB's work, mostly directly intersecting with Tri-Excellence. And I just want to acknowledge that Tri-Excellence is a sub-consultant to our owner's representative team, one of those many sub-consultants, and has been a valued team member in facilitating HAAB meetings and frankly helping to push ODOT to engage the community in different ways, focused around building trust and partnership and relationship. And so we, of course, know and acknowledge we have a lot more work to do on that front, though our partnership with Tri-Excellence has really helped us move forward in positive ways. So I know I've had the opportunity to speak with some of you directly in the past weeks following some of the media coverage, and I, of course, welcome continued dialogue with that. So if anyone has any questions, concerns, or wants to talk more, please reach out to me and we can connect and continue to talk outside of this meeting. But felt that was important to acknowledge the importance of your work in this process as we go forward before we go into updates. So thank you for giving me that moment. By way of project updates, again, want to hit on three things. So funding, partnerships, and then our engagement ahead. So we have a lot of work to do together. So for funding and status of grant awards, some exciting news. ODOT has signed the Reconnecting Communities Grant Agreement, and it's currently with USDOT for their signature. So a huge moment to really secure that $450 million that was awarded to us through the Reconnecting Communities program. So once that agreement is signed by USDOT, we can begin work on the grant activities. So that'll support the design and construction of the first portion of the highway cover. And with that agreement being signed, we'll first begin the final design of the highway cover section and the process to acquire the needed property to be able to do that construction. And then we expect construction of the highway cover to begin by 2027. We're also anxiously awaiting USDOT's decision on the infra grant request. This again was something that the HAAB helped us put forward in writing a letter of support. The grant requested, an additional $750 million in federal funding, coupled with a state match to complete construction of the highway cover, build the I-5 mainline improvements in the central project area, and support multiple multimodal connections across I-5. We're still waiting to hear on that. So as soon as we know the status, we'll make sure that HAAB members that you're made aware of those grant award decisions as well. Let's see here. By way of funding, one last piece here. So in addition to the grants, we're also exploring options to begin construction on smaller packages of work next summer. So at the August Oregon Transportation Commission meeting, we shared with the commission some opportunities for summer 2025 construction that include kind of some smaller packages of bridge preservation work. So think seismic retrofit, concrete repair, structural deck overlay, as well as stormwater improvements. And so these are smaller elements of the project's former early work packages, and they're at the 90% design mark and the most construction ready. So we're beginning to prepare some opportunities for early construction work. And at the same commission meeting, the Transportation Commission approved ODOT's broader request for an allocation of annual Federal Highway Administration redistribution funding. What this means and what this is. So every year, our federal partners at Federal Highways, they provide states an opportunity to receive an allocation of redistribution funding. So these are funds that have been set aside for projects nationally that have been awarded under competitive grant programs, but are released as available funds to states if they aren't able to be expended by a certain period of time. And so should ODOT be the recipient of some of those national redistribution dollars, the commission has approved up to $60 million in additional funding for Rose Quarter to support some early construction work. This funding, I want to be clear, this funding hasn't been confirmed, but the commission's policy direction is supportive of Rose Quarter being a project to utilize a portion of those funds should they become available. So wanted to make you aware of that. So that closes my update on funding and grants. The next piece I want to hit on really quickly here is partnerships. So I have 3 key updates around partnerships. The first, which you all should have received a copy of our letter of agreement via email last month, but we have a letter of agreement signed with the City of Portland and RIP City Management, really focused on the collaborative work plan for the local street design that relates to the relocation of the I-5 southbound off-ramp. So this letter really sets out our collaborative approach and the process to look at those local streets and really build on the input that we've heard from the HAAB previously, focused on ensuring that we're maximizing the potential for the central highway cover area for development, and that we're consolidating traffic from the I-5 ramp really south of that central highway cover area. So we'll be working with our partners on the technical evaluation of the local street connections over the coming months, and we'll make sure that we're reporting out the findings to the HAAB really as a follow-up to our ongoing conversation around this. The second partnership update relates to our work with Albina Vision Trust, specifically to the OTC directed resolution and associated work plan around the highway cover governance and land ownership. So I think you all received in advance of your meeting today some information with a status update, but I just want to note that we're continuing to work collaboratively with Albina Vision Trust and are really at the beginning phases of trying to identify, a potential strategy to address the regulatory challenges. So again, we'll continue to keep the HAAB updated on this as we progress and define those next steps. And then lastly, on partnerships, just want to highlight that COAC is going to make a comeback. So our Community Opportunity Advisory Committee, we do plan on restarting the COAC in early 2025, primarily as we continue to progress towards some early construction options and in anticipation of, really kicking off the reconnecting communities work as well. So we'll look for some opportunities for HAAB and COAC collaboration next year as well. So looking ahead, the project team, the city, we've been working with your esteemed facilitator, Ms. Erica Warren, in developing the HAAB's 2025 work plan. More details of this plan will be shared through your upcoming one-on-ones with Erica. But we've got some exciting topics for you into 2025. The work plan being one of those, so that you're read into what we have in store for you. And then in addition to HAAB meetings in 2025, our city partners will be engaging HAAB members and community members in the Reconnecting Albina planning project. And I know that you're going to hear a little bit more about that later in this agenda as well. So I know this is our final meeting for 2024, but I just want to note that we have some exciting stuff coming up for our important work together in 2025. So I think that'll conclude my updates for today. I know we have a lot of important conversations, so I don't want to take up any more time so we can get to that. But I'll pause to see if there's any questions around that update.
I did see one question in the chat. Andrew, were you going to chime in there?
Yeah, just real quick. I know the additional funding with the 60 million. I was just curious to see if there was any limitations in how those funds could be used. If this unsure, that's fine too. I was just asking. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. As it relates to our commission, they really directed us to use the 60 million on early construction work opportunities. And then depending on kind of the type of funding that may be coming our way, I'm not entirely sure if there'll be other federal strings attached to that, but by way of what the commission approved, it would be for early construction work.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. One more question from Mr. Posey.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah, great. So I was glad to hear that the what is it, the CAB is coming back.
COAC.
I'm sorry, the COAC is coming back. So there's some concern for me on that, Megan. You know, it's been 40 or 50 years that contractors have been left out of these packages, and I understand there's some pre-work that's being done. I have some concern from your compliance people about whether or not people who traditionally been left out of the marketplace on being able to access this work will be at the front of the line instead of the back of the line. Give you an example is I understand with the city of Portland right now, African-American truckers have been left out. They're not getting paid at the same level that they should be. If there's some pre-work that's going to be done, do we have to go through a process in order to get them at the front of the line? We know the historical racism and the discrimination that has occurred through ODOT, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just wondering, where is your compliance people? Where are the people who are going to get these people who have been traditionally left out to get at the front of the line so they can really kind of take advantage of these projects, and whether or not people are trying to cultivate a bench, as it were, a stream of people who has traditionally been left out. Can you tell me where you are? You guys have changed your civil rights people, your compliance people. It's been a real terrible situation with ODOT. Y'all if y'all haven't fixed that already, please tell me something that will assure me that we won't keep doing the same thing we've been doing for the last 25, 30 years.
Yeah, and James, really appreciate your comments on that. And I can't speak to the city of Portland piece, as it relates to Rose Quarter. And thanks to much of your leadership when you were sitting on COAC when they were active, we still have our diversity and subcontracting plan that the COAC helped us form that really was intended to, I think, at least hit on some of the elements that you're identifying of like, how do we break down barriers for DBE participation and DBE participation in a meaningful way. With this project, COAC, you helped us define the opportunities, for some mini CMGC or mini prime opportunities. So we're still going to be carrying that forward and that plan forward in partnership with our contractor. As it relates to our ODOT compliance team, they're as we're looking towards, a construction restart and getting closer, we're pulling them in again to the project, making sure that we're in alignment with that diversity and subcontracting plan, and really what we've committed to COAC previously. So I think our work and what we've promised you as part of COAC won't change in our direction going forward.
So you said a lot of words, Megan, but I'm still not assured that we have a plan in place to make sure people, the compliance people, your civil rights people, they've been a mess, and you know it. I ain't got to explain this to you. They have not been what they ought to be, and I'm not sure there's any coordination with the city, the PDOT people. It's just a real, it tears my hair out to see that we're still at the same place we've been 30 years in terms of coordinating, ensuring people of color get work on these projects. Megan, y'all got to lay out something that gives us a definitive plan to make sure our people get some work on these projects, Megan. I'm just not satisfied with that answer you just gave because it doesn't give me any definitive understanding who's doing this. There's changes in your civil rights department. There's changes all across the board, even at the city of Portland. Help me understand how are people going to get work on this project starting out right now.
Yeah, I totally hear you. And I would definitely I'm open to having an offline conversation with you, James, to dig on a little bit more. But I think for the project, what we can directly affect and what we've worked together with the community on, our plan is that diversity and subcontracting plan that you helped us create. And that's what we're going to be carrying forward to ensure that the community and DBE have meaningful jobs, and we're getting the community to work as part of this. So that's our starting point, but we've got a lot of work to do as we implement that going forward. And I hear you in needing to make sure that we're well coordinated with our compliance folks as well on that.
Yeah, I'm gonna thank you, Mr. Posey, and I'm sure that you and Megan will connect in regards to that with us moving forward. Mr. Washington, I'm gonna give us just one more question and a couple more minutes before we move ahead.
I think thank you, Erica. I think as I remember a lot of the early conversation, around not only do we look at just getting some of our people of color these contracts, but how far can we begin to unpack this, just not make it such a narrow scope as far as just construction work is concerned? Is that how do we mitigate other collateral or alliances and how far out we can actually reach other small businesses and the types that we can bring into this circle and be able to have some of these funds unpack themselves in a different kind of way. So for me, I was in support of what James is saying, but not only that, I mean, we were real conscious about the thought that we knew, Megan, that there was at some point we had to start looking at, the alliances, other types of organizations and businesses that help these processes move along and get some of those contracts to them also.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Washington.
Huh?
I said, yep, thank you, Mr. Washington. Like that. Megan, I am going to thank you for your project updates and for continuing to be open to dialogue and to active change with input from this group and the broader community. I'm wondering if you can help us move forward in our agenda with an introduction of the work that Echo Northwest is going to present this evening.
Yeah, absolutely. So our key agenda item today is going to be led by our team at Echo Northwest. So this is really coming from a lot of the questions that we've received from HAAB members over the past months to understand some of the initial, financial feasibility around what ultimately goes on top of the highway cover. So I know that there's been a number of community conversations over this, spring and summer around the highway cover scenario in partnership with Albina Vision Trust and the HAAB. And so Echo's work today really incorporates that input from those meetings and starts to identify some of the financials and what dynamics it may take to move that forward. So an acknowledgement that this is really Echo's, the work from Echo is a first step in understanding this financial feasibility. It's a data point that really begins our process, and it is by no means the final output. I know that we've also received a number of questions from HAAB on, tell us the number of jobs that are going to be created by the development on top of the highway cover. I want to be clear that today's information, we're not able to get to that data quite yet, but this is important information to build on the scenario discussions that you've had to help us start to get to that information. So this data that you'll hear today, it'll be shared out, and it'll inform the upcoming RAP work. So RAP is the Reconnecting Albina Planning Project that's led by the City of Portland. So you'll hear a little bit later this afternoon in your meeting what the next steps of that will be. And then ultimately, the results and takeaways, I think I want to just frame out, really include some great indicators. And I'm really excited to have Echo share this information with you, because what you'll learn is that there are a number of opportunities for meaningful future development on top. And we're excited to keep working with you as the HAAB and our partners to make this happen. So with that, Cadence, I believe I am turning it over to you and appreciate all of the work that you've done to get us to this point, and turn it over to you to share the information.
All right. Thanks, Megan. Good evening, everybody. I'm so excited to be here tonight with you all. And Mike Wilkerson, my colleague, is also here to really talk about the culmination of several months of our work with you all on this project, really trying to figure out what the high-level feasibility of vertical development might be on this cover. We all know that the vertical development is a critical component to the overall project, and we were hired to help move the conversation a little bit forward about what might be built on top of the cover and what it's going to take to get it done. And there are so many possibilities of what could be built on the cover. And we want to make sure that whatever we studied were things that were relevant to the HAAB. And so we've been working with you all in conversation and talking with AVT and ODOT and the city to really dive into the possibilities. Next slide, please. And the next slide. Thank you. And so our scope of work for this project was really focusing on 5 uses for what might be built on the cover. And even though what's actually built at the end of the day might not be exactly what we modeled, we did want it to be relevant information about what's possible and what the HAAB actually would be interested in seeing. And it can serve as sort of a foundation for some key takeaways, but also for refining the design in further conversations, in discussions going forward, talking about what partnerships might need to be brought to bear in order to make it happen, and then refining also like what wealth creation and jobs might be created by these different development types. And these are all potential next steps as we move forward. So what we did was we developed 5 use cases that Mike will talk about in a minute. And 2 of them are open space, because we know in both the short term and the long term, open space is going to be a critical primary element of what happens on top of the cover. And then when we had those 5 use cases, we developed pro formas both on what it would take to build those things, but also what the operations would look like over time. And these are high-level estimates for both construction and operations. Nobody's going to go to the bank tomorrow and build off these pro formas, but we do think that these models help answer some key questions and also give rise to other questions that we'll continue to dive into as we move forward. Next slide, please. And in order to develop those use cases and inputs for our pro formas, obviously we've been here at the HAAB a few times. We also conducted interviews with contractors, with the Parks Department, folks at the city, folks at ODOT, Albina Vision Trust. We also participated in some of that summer engagement that AVT did. All kind of came together in order to refine the 5 use cases that we're going to discuss next, as well as the inputs to our analysis. And the results of that analysis is what Mike is going to talk about now, and I'll turn it over to him.
Thanks, Cadence. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see many of you again. I think what I'm going to delve into is admittedly a little bit of a technical exercise. And so I'm going to start with some key takeaways before we get into some of the more technical aspects of how we model it in some of the numbers, and then kind of follow up with a summary. So if there are questions along their way that are really technical in nature, I'm happy to pause and kind of revisit that and provide some more explanation and clarity if possible. And I think at the end, we were reserving a lot of time for more comments and discussion. So really, if it's a technical question, happy to take those on. If it's more of a discussion in aggregate, let's pick that up at the end. And I'll look to Erica for some help in navigating that one. So I think, again, summary key takeaways here are, again, there is a lot of range of uncertainty about the assumption. So again, this is meant to be a tool that helps us understand the nature of relationships and how much things swing up and down. This isn't about getting it down to the accurate dollar or even tens of thousands of dollars in the thing that matters. And why there's a lot of uncertainty about this is the program is largely not detailed, and the governance structure is an important component of that. And those 2 things can definitely sway the impact of the results. What I think we have learned, though, and this is a crucial key point, is that construction post-completion of the cover will add complexity, but it may not necessarily increase the cost. And so I think what that leads to, and many of these points lead to the same thing, is having a really committed, trusted partner who can help navigate all this complexity in steps, but they're not necessarily all cost drivers. The ground lease is another one of those elements of complexity that I would say generally can be considered a benefit because it reduces the need for upfront capital. And that can be really important as we're talking about some of these community serving and wealth generating benefits. To not have to pay for expensive land as you would in other parts of the city allows us to do different things. What it does, though, is it does impact ongoing operating costs. And so the nature and structure of that ground lease are really crucial, and we'll unpack that a little bit more in a couple slides. I think the last piece, again, is as we think about whatever the market rent might be, as we think about community serving benefits and wealth generating programs, what that does is that requires either additional equity and or philanthropic support, either upfront to build it or on an ongoing basis. And so that's really one of the key things we wanted to highlight here is how, if we're looking to support wealth, what that might mean in terms of the types of committed partners we need on the capital side. Next slide, please. So next steps, and we'll revisit this again at the end with ODOT and city team, but I think key to this is we need to continue to explore partnership opportunities that bring together private sector, community, public sector, and philanthropy. Cadence mentioned certainly the short-term and long-term open space design and programming are key. We're going to explore 2 of those, but it's a larger conversation for sure. And that as the program is refined, the governance structure, the relationships, all of that will be key inputs into the next steps, of which we have operating assumptions that we're using now, but all of those are subject to change. All right, next slide. So what we have done is selected what we think is a wide range of use cases that kind of demonstrate both open space and programmed concepts, some of which are more community facing. And so those 5 starting from the south are the Albina Food Market Hall, that's parcel 8. Then we move up into the Plaza and Amphitheater, which is a heavily programmed and more of a straightforward open space concept on 2 parcels. To the north of that is the Youth Recreation Center. And to the north of that are the Mind, Soul, and Body or Wellness Center. And we'll talk more specifically with details on each of these, but just to set the ground foundation, these are the 5 that we're going to explore in more detail. Next slide, please. What those 5 uses fall into is really 3 categories of financial analysis. And how we set up the models and how we interpret those are going to fall into each of these 3 components. And so the first is one where there are more market-supported uses, where that market rent can support construction and also the operating costs. That is the food hall and the wellness center fall into that category. The second category is one where there is some revenue generation, but it likely cannot cover the cost of operating. That would be the youth recreation center or some of our program spaces. And so those we think about differently than ones where we can support construction and operations. And then the last would be open space that's not generating revenue. Those would be our no cost recovery options. And we'll detail what that looks like. So again, when we step through these, just remember, we're going to talk about each one of those 3 as separate things. Next slide, please. So financial feasibility, and there are a lot of words here, but I think to summarize it, what we're really looking to do is compare development feasibility using a financial pro forma. So that's essentially programmatic math that supports a number of inputs that support outputs. What those inputs are building program, development costs, what rents are, what revenues are, what operating costs are. And then we want to take all that and analyze that in the context of a decision-making criteria that developers, debt partners, equity partners use. And then crucially for this part of our analysis, we're really focused on understanding the components of debt and equity and philanthropy. And so to do that, we're really focused on the construction feasibility underwriting way, decision-making framework. So what we're taking is a bunch of inputs that will then tell us, here's how much debt might be supported, how much equity we might need, and how much philanthropy we might need to augment both that equity and that debt. Next slide. So to do that, and I think this is not the first and certainly not the last time I'm going to mention this, there are lots of uncertainty and unknowns. Some of those unknowns we're aware of and can talk about. That would be the ground lease, for example. We have some unknowns that we really can't contemplate. That's the broad range of things that could be in a governance structure. And those are more challenging and certainly nuanced conversations. And I think the one thing that we have some ability to calculate is, as we think about reducing rents below what a market rate would be for community serving and wealth generating purposes, we can talk about that trade-off. Next slide, please. So the ground lease is an important component for us to understand. And I think when we think about ODOT and its statutory requirements, it is for a fair market value as part of that ground lease. So we have done that in our modeling. Having said that, valuing the land is very challenging. There aren't examples of other freeway caps anywhere around that we can point to that say, here's how much they have transacted for. I think the value, the cost of what it entails to build the cap is not really a suitable land valuation. So we're really trying to think about land that has similar development potential in proximate areas and really trying to use those as comparables to kind of think about how we value the land. And that is not a straightforward process. As we think about the lease, the value matters, but so does the duration of the lease. And so when we're thinking about trying to attract capital, debt, and equity partners, the longer the term of that lease is going to provide more certainty for them versus a shorter term of a lease. So that does matter. And then the structure of the lease is probably the most important piece, which is, what does that look like? What is the percent of value as an option that you can pay? There are prepayment options. There are many structures for which ground lease take in public-private partnership. And so those details really matter. We have assumed a relatively straightforward approach where it's a percent of value per year, which we commonly see in the market at a land valuation, just so we can have a number that we can include in there that would be something in the realm of fair market value. Next slide, please. The operating and maintenance and open space, I think, are very challenging again, because we don't have a lot of comparables of what something like a public-private partnership of a maintain and cost of construction for open space looks like. So to do that to the extent possible, we've had interviews with Portland Parks. We've looked at Pioneer Courthouse Square, Directors Park, other examples in the city of kind of similarly comparable facilities to kind of understand what it would take to operate that. The governance structure, again, is one of our many unknowns where we have public and private space that we're talking about. In the city, we do have examples of enhanced service districts, so think downtown clean and safe, or business improvement or local improvement districts, financial vehicles, for example, that are used to fund things like the streetcar. So there are a lot of options that could be deployed here to think about how that would be funded. Common area maintenance charges are more like what you'd see in a private master planned district. So those may be possibilities, and certainly there are a variety of other revenue sources. We haven't delved into any of those in any meaningful way here, and the structure of how we model this kind of allows us to do that. So we can talk more about that when we get to the specific use case examples. Next slide. Okay, so this is our attempt to try to provide a simple graphic, and sometimes simplicity is good. Hopefully this is one of those instances. When you're thinking about approaching a program in a specific location on a specific parcel, you can use the pro forma to talk about the amount of rent you would need to support market rate debt. And so we start our modeling by trying to calculate what that number would be. Next slide, please. And so what we then contextualize that by is what are achievable rents in the market. So we look at what it might cost to build, we can come up with what a rent would be required, and then we can go out and say, okay, in that area for that type of use, what are tenants willing to pay? And that number in today's market is always lower because of the challenging capital environment we're operating in. And so what that does is that takes a rent, and we're going to go through each of these numbers for each of these uses. So this is just kind of theoretical, and then we'll use real numbers in a moment. That achievable market rent is going to be lower than the rent required to hit our market rate debt requirements. Next slide, please. Then we layer on more complexity in this specific example because we have a ground lease, and that does hit our operating expenses. We have district operating and maintenance costs, which again are atypical of when you're looking at a specific parcel. So we add those layers of uncertainty onto it. And then we can quantify when we're talking about community benefit, if we're going to reduce rent, what does that mean for our upfront need for capital? And what does that mean for our ongoing need for operating funds? So the difference between the rent required to support market rate debt, so that is to say, achievable rent minus ground lease minus district costs minus community benefit, in aggregate is our feasibility gap. And we can talk about what that is in orders of magnitude for each of these uses that we're going to talk about in a moment. Next slide, please. There were no questions there, I assume is a good thing, and we'll continue on, but certainly we can revisit these when we get the numbers here in a couple of slides. So what that's going to allow us to do is really solve for our capital stack, which is a fancy way of saying how much debt and equity do we have. That is what our model is trying to answer as its primary question. And so debt, we know today, is very challenged because of the macro market conditions we're in. Prior to a couple of weeks ago, we did not have a rate cut. We had less certainty. We now have more certainty that rates will be reducing. What we don't know is when and how quickly and how far they will fall. So what we have done is an improved market conditions where we think the market is heading into a range of where commercial construction is much more likely to happen than in a world that we're sitting in today, or maybe even 2 weeks ago as even more challenged. And so we start with the current conditions, but acknowledge that in the near future, we will have conditions that are more conducive to development and focus really on that state. As it relates to equity and philanthropy, what we're really looking at here is how much equity would we have in a project? And then when will we need potentially philanthropy to augment that equity? We're assuming equity is getting a return commensurate with market conditions, whereas philanthropy is assumed to be a grant. So that is to say, we're not looking at social equity rates of return that are unknown and somewhat speculative. We're saying there's equity, it's going to approach the deal as it normally would, and where that can't happen, then philanthropy is assumed to be that backfilling part of the capital stack. Okay, next slide, please. So there are a set of kind of assumptions we're using across each of these parcels that we'll talk about. One is that working with the design team, this program is really maximizing the development potential on cover. So that is to say, We looked at maximizing the development potential. This isn't something that's a scaled down version of what is possible. Part of that includes that there is no on-site parking. A, it's challenging to do, and B, it would take away from the development yield. And so while there are examples of programmed uses with on-site parking in and around the metro, this does not specifically have any on-site parking, and that is an important distinction. I think the second piece is we don't have a specific modeled requirement for a building owner. We're expecting kind of a community-facing partner. We don't know what that rate of return requirement is. We do have a fee for a developer in there, which is typical in the market, but we're not trying to suggest that if this project doesn't hit long-term financial feasibility metrics, that it is or isn't feasible. Again, our modeling is much more focused on understanding, can we support market rate debt? Can we bring in equity in typical ways? And how far away from feasibility are we with this program? And then how much does looking at community benefit impact the need to bring in philanthropy? Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're jumping into the first example. It's the Albina Food Market. This program is a 3-story building with approximately 49,000 square feet. And with any food hall, not all of it is going to be leasable. So we assume there are some public convening spaces in there. So what we're assuming is effectively 2/3 of that space is leasable. As it relates to the cost, this would be something like $350 a square foot that we think of as hard cost, and tenant improvement allowance to fit out that space. We do assume a soft cost provision, contingency, and like I mentioned before, a developer fee. And so what that works out to is roughly a $28 million cost of construction. On the operating side, we're assuming these are triple net rents, which means effectively, because the rents can support operating and maintenance, that the tenants would pay that and that the rent would go to cover the capital requirements effectively. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have 4 rows. Let's start on the top row. This top row, as I mentioned, is kind of the, if we're just solving for how much rent you would need in the current market to support market rate debt, which again is at abnormally high rates compared to where we were in the last development cycle, that would suggest you need something like $62 per square foot of rent. When we look at an improved market condition, which is more like the aspirational target that we're looking at, the rent lowers because as the cost of capital and debt service goes down, so does the rent. And that would mean we'd need about $51 a square foot. And again, that's a precise number. There are margins of error around that. So don't think of that as precise down to the cent. That's just a range of error. What that suggests is something like $20 million of debt that could then be paired with $8 million of equity, or 70% debt and 30% equity. So that's kind of our grounding feasibility hurdle or threshold. What we then look at is, what do we observe in the market today? And what we observe in the market today is the ability to pay for something like $50 a square foot for kind of small curated spaces that don't include the public space as part of that. Very close to what we would need in terms of what we would need in improved market conditions. So $51 versus $50. Put differently, this project is very close to financially feasible in that improved market state of conditions, using traditional debt and equity valuations at 70% and 30%. So that's the first point I think that's bolded that we want to highlight again, is that this particular program is very close to feasible. What we then want to talk about is, if we've thought about community benefit as a set of blended lease rates, those lease rates could be much lower than 50 paired with lease rates at 50, so that the blend of that works out to $33. This is not to suggest that all community facing would be paying $33. Some could be significantly lower than that. But when we blend that out, it gets to $33. And what that would require is effectively more equity and or philanthropy to fill a gap. Because as you reduce rent from $50 to $33 per square foot, the amount of debt that can be supported drops from 19 million to 12 million. And so that additional $7 million needs to come in the form of equity and or philanthropy to fill that gap. So again, that's one of those metrics we want to be able to communicate, is in a community facing programming, targeting wealth building, that requires technically more philanthropy or more equity to come to the deal in the form of roughly $7 million. Okay. We're going to repeat the same thing for the next four programmed uses. So if there are technical questions now about any of these, certainly happy to take those on. Otherwise, we can kind of move through the next four program uses in a very similar fashion. Okay, next slide, please. So the next program use again falls in the same bucket, which is market rents that can support construction and operating expenses. That's the Wellness Center. This is, again, a three-story building totaling roughly 63,000 square feet. The costs here would be similar on a hard cost. The difference here is the tenant improvement allowance would be expected to be higher than it would be in a food hall. Similar soft cost contingency developer fee. And so the cost of construction here would be about $43 million. Again, because the rents can cover operating costs, this would be thought of as a triple net rent, which is to say the tenants would pay any operating fee, and then the rent would go to support debt and equity. Next slide. So again, we have our four categories. And I think that the difference here again is the rents required to support are a little bit lower in this particular program. You would need $49 a square foot would be the target in the current market conditions. In improved market conditions, which is really our baseline for analysis, that would drop to $39 a square foot of triple net rent. And again, we're using our assumption of 30% debt and 30% equity and 70% debt. So $30 million of debt and $13 million of equity. The achievable market rents here are $35. So this project is slightly less feasible than the first example of the food hall, which was effectively right at that market feasibility. Here, we might have a very small gap. And again, there are margins of error around this to where we might need to bring in additional equity or philanthropy using market rate debt to roughly $3 million. And so we can support $27 million of debt, and we would need $16 million of equity and or philanthropy. Again, the community benefit is a blend here, so that $25 is meant to be representative of rates lower than 25 and higher than 25 that together come to $25. That then decreases the amount of debt that can be supported from 27 million to 19 million. So effectively $8 million that would likely be in the form of philanthropy would need to come in to close that feasibility gap in order to bring market rate debt and equity partners. Next slide, please. The Youth Recreation Center now falls into this second category, which is to say that it cannot support the cost of construction because its revenues aren't likely enough to support the cost of operations. And so what this tips us into is the need for equity and philanthropy to cover the cost of construction, and then potentially ongoing annual subsidies to support programming that's community facing. And so this is another three-story building of roughly 47,000 square feet. The cost of construction here is significantly higher because the build out is more complicated than it would be if you're building, let's say, a typical shell for a retail purpose, and the tenant improvement allowance would be lower than the other two uses. So what that breaks down to is roughly $30 million of hard costs. What we're focusing on here is not triple net rent, but more so, how much does it cost to operate the facility? So if we understand how much it costs to operate the facility, we can look at what limited revenue generating options there are and look at that comparison. And so when we've done market research, roughly equates to $20 per square foot, and that would include personnel costs, materials, supplies, et cetera. So the total programming of the building at about $20 per square foot per year. Next slide. So what you'll see here is, again, a new column on the right, which is operating subsidy per year, because the revenue generated from this programmed use cannot support the ongoing operating requirements. That's that subsidy. So that's that $600,000 per year with an assumption that roughly $10 per square foot can be charged. So through leasing, programming, et cetera, sponsorships, those types of things, there would be some revenue generating happening in the building, but not at that $57 per square foot that would be required in improved market conditions. And so what that means effectively is you would need the entire $30 million to be some combination of equity and philanthropy, because you cannot support any market rate debt. And so on a pure market rate debt number, you'd need $21 million. That can't happen. That tips us into a different category where we now have, that's again, $600,000 a year to operate the facility, and that increased amount of equity and philanthropy in $30 million to annually, or sorry, $30 million as a one-time fee, $600,000 as an annual subsidy. Next slide. This next category is open space, but it's programmed open space. And so you can think about that as something like Pioneer Square, where there are a variety of infrastructure installed, and that infrastructure hosts events, programs, etc., and that those events generate revenue, but that revenue does not offset the cost to operate the facility. So again, similarly here, we're looking at 40,000 square feet, which is a typical Portland City block. The cost to build out this amphitheater and program would be about $200 per square foot. So that would be $11 million of development costs to develop, again, a very highly programmed open space. And then to run that facility, again, is expensive. It's $60 per square foot per year. So this would be things like janitorial, security, events administration, et cetera. And so we know what it costs to operate the facility. What we're then trying to understand is how much revenue would there be to offset that operating cost. Next slide, please. So again, looking at various examples in the region, we see that something like $20 a square foot of space can be generated. That doesn't cover the cost of operations. And so therefore that tips us into the need for equity and philanthropy to fund the entire construction cost. So that $11 million. And then per year can be very expensive to operate. Again, there's a range in here. It could be higher than this based on something like Pioneer Square. It could be lower than this if it's something more like Director Park. But again, this is kind of a midpoint range of what operating a highly programmed space would be, again, with an unknown around what that revenue market generating potential looks like. Last slide. Okay, so our basic open space here again is cost to develop, but generating effectively no revenue, and having therefore a lower cost to operate and maintain the facility. And so this works out to something like $9 million in development costs, but costs much less to operate the facility at about $7.50, which would be janitorial, security, and maintenance, those types of things. Next slide, please. And so here, again, the entire cost of construction would need to be supported by equity and philanthropy. That's $9 million. And then annually to operate and maintain basic open space would be more like $300,000 a year. Next slide, please. So I think in summary, as we've gone through these five types of program space in those three different categories, I think what we see is the market revenue generating falls in a range of financial feasibility from very close to or right at feasibility to slightly below, where we would need some small amount of equity and philanthropic support, to community program spaces, which need more philanthropic and equity support. And again, the details of the ground lease and the governance framework matter. That will impact the amount of equity and philanthropy required to achieve financial feasibility. And again, I think this points to the need for a committed partner who can help navigate all of those challenges. The community serving programming and wealth generating benefits we looked at, in some instances, could nearly double the upfront need for equity and or philanthropy versus something that were more market focused in terms of what it's looking at. So I think that's a helpful lens that we can apply here in this exercise, is just getting orders of magnitude around what wealth generating community serving programming could do to the overall financial feasibility. Go hand it back over now to the ODOT and city team for some next steps, and then certainly happy to open it up for some questions.
Yeah, thank you. Megan, I know we're sort of sharing the slide. I believe I go first. Is that correct?
Yeah, take it away, and then I can wrap up with the last two items.
Okay,
there.
Unless you wanted to start us off with anything, I'll go ahead. All right, perfect. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. My name is Patricia Diefendorfer. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the chief planner here in the city's Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. And in our bureau, we oversee the long-range land use planning work of the city. So as you know, I think I've met many of you, and we have talked a lot about the partnership between ODOT and the city, and certainly the HAAB as ODOT's advisory board. So we wanted to kind of give you a sense of some of the next steps that we are jointly working on together. And so building off of the workshops that happened over the summer that started to really distill what the desired uses are on the highway cover and in the surrounding, surplus lands, we will be using the Reconnecting Albina planning project to start thinking about how we connect those proposed uses on the highway cover and redevelopment opportunities in the broader district with each other. And really what that means is trying to think about the connective tissue between the cover and the broader district with a focus on street connectivity, what the streets look like and how they function and how they feel, and then how the urban design standards can help guide what buildings look like and how they meet these new streets, so that we can have a good sense of what this place is going to feel like in the future. And so really building on the foundation of the uses that have been identified is just thinking about how they all fit together and connect with each other and in the broader district. And then in addition to that, or in conjunction with that, continuing to look at local street design with Broadway as a future main street. So, the city has obtained also some Reconnecting Communities Grant capital funding to do improvements to the Broadway, and we call that the Broadway Main Street project. And so we are going to be continuing to look at enhancements along Broadway as a future main street for pedestrian, to improve pedestrian experience and to improve the interface between the street and the adjacent land uses. And then we will also be working along with ODOT, continuing to explore partnership opportunities, financing structures, and governance models related to both, as you heard from the presentation from Eco Northwest about, both the how to fund and governance related to construction, as well as ongoing operation and maintenance of the proposed uses. And you heard a little bit about, what this could look like in terms of both a combination of public, private, community investment, philanthropy, et cetera. And really based on the community goals, and market considerations and mix of uses on the highway cover, coordinate with other development initiatives and opportunities that are happening within the broader district. So that's, I will kind of stop there. I think I hand it over to you, Megan, a little bit. This next one is something we're collectively working on together, I think City and ODOT, but I'll let you get started.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If I miss anything, Patricia, please chime in. But, the next piece of work here is taking this, land use scenario and making sure that we're linking that up with the technical considerations. So leading up to, the scenario that's been explored, you helped us identify kind of the right technical considerations around the highway cover structure. So we know that the structure can accommodate what was just presented to you. Our next step in these technical considerations is thinking about, all right, what do those utility connections look like? How will the pedestrian access or vehicle access function in this area? Where are we identifying loading or parking areas, and the respective local street designs that Patricia mentioned as well. So making sure that we're just moving forward in that technical consideration. And this, of course, will be a partnership between ODOT and the city and community partners as we iterate the design from the 30% preliminary design marker up to final design and readying for construction. And then, of course, we'll be having touch points and refining the feasibility analysis as we go in this process too. And then I'll say, lastly, for the last point, our next step will also be continuing to progress with the future, permanent development that will happen on the cover, but recognizing that some of that may not be possible kind of to begin on a day one of opening of the highway cover. We also need to consider what are those supportive interim uses, what's that interim use strategy? Considering some open space and how do we set up opening day scenario that is supportive, and it really helps us achieve that long-term development approach too. So the interim use piece will be an important part of our HAAB work going forward into 2025. So with that, Patricia, unless there's anything else you wanted to add there, maybe we can.
Yeah, I think we covered it. Thank you. Happy to take any questions if there are any, but otherwise we can continue.
Are there any questions from HAAB members in regards to all of that deep and juicy information that you just heard in regards to potentially long-term development scenarios and feasibility for community vision and how it aligns with community values? This is your opportunity to ask those questions. Mr. Posey, I see your hand.
Yeah, that was quite a presentation, and it's kind of mind-boggling to see all the things. I guess the question for me is that category of equity and philanthropy was quite stark. I guess what I would be wondering is in comparison to other projects across the country and locally, if we excluded that particular category, what would other projects look like? How do other projects survive and or survive in this market without that category? If we extract that from the equation, what would it look like? I guess what I'm trying to get at is seems to me we're heavily dependent on the category in order to really get anything done. Am I wrong on that, or how did I read that?
No, I think that's a really good observation, Mr. Posey. I think the range we tried to select is reflective of some of those program uses are pretty much market feasible and don't have abnormal amounts of equity and philanthropy. So I think the food hall, if it was just a privately funded food hall somewhere else in the city, it would try to attract debt and equity in a very similar way. Once you move into more of the things that would be more like things traditionally provided by the public or in a public-private partnership, like a heavily programmed open space, right? That's typically done through the public sector. So again, the governance structure there really matters. Or the recreation center oftentimes are community facilities funded by public dollars that are then maintained in a public sense as well. So I think, again, that observation around the need to bring in equity and or philanthropy as we lean into more community facing and wealth generating purpose was really one of those key points of this exercise to help communicate that there is a range, and depending on the program can require significant amounts of equity. And again, a committed partner to help execute that vision for the development.
Well, two thoughts is that, in a business world, to try to depend upon those two categories is suspect. In terms of real economic capacity and so forth. So the question I have for you is, have you all put a but-for lens on that? But for the racism and discrimination that has occurred over African-American community, what would it look like? What would our observation look like if it wasn't for the redlining, the discrimination in loan lending, et cetera, would we still be in the same precarious situation about how we see this project and the way we would position ourselves as a community? Because it appears to me that we're in a very tenable situation depending on somebody's benevolence and equity and philanthropy. And I'm just not sure whether or not you all have made a calculation based upon the historical context of exclusion and racism, whether or not this particular scenario would represent something that we need to have a lens on. At a very minimum, we need to have an understanding of why we're in this situation. Why are we put in this precarious situation to have to land on that category? to achieve anything we're doing in this community.
So that's a complicated question, certainly. I think what I would say is, our scope of work particular to this specific project did not contemplate that really in any meaningful way. However, the CIP project with AVT in its various stages did explore that, I would say, somewhat comprehensively. And so not to say that that's a substitute for doing that work here on this project, but I think that has been explored in those previous efforts. And I know you personally have been involved in many of those presentations around quantifying the intergenerational wealth loss. And those numbers are certainly very big. But as it relates to what we're looking at here, we didn't try to come in and say, what would that number look like in the context of, specific programmed uses. And I don't know if Cadence or anyone else on the project team or maybe even JT have further comments or responses on that one.
Yeah, go ahead. I just want to say that, I've been around this stuff for quite a while. And even when we project this out the way it's projected out, some people might see this as an unfair, sort of approach to this thing, favoring minority communities because they're in a precarious situation, a less than qualified position to be able to implement something like this. If you portray it in this way, it seems like we're less than, and we're in this situation because of who we are as opposed to the circumstances that put us in this position. And for you all not to talk about a lens that would project out why we got in this situation, why it's necessary to have such an emphasis on philanthropy and equity without telling the story of how we got here, it seems to me a little unfair. I'm just talking my personal opinion about it. Maybe nobody else would agree with that, but and you all have to put a series of lenses on why this is the way it's happening and why it's justifiable to do it this way as opposed to just laying it out here this way. If you follow what I'm saying, does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, Mr. Posey, I think I'll just also offer that if any pro forma for any project would have equity as part of it, and if they wanted community benefits, they would also have some philanthropy. So although this is in historic Albina, and that is true, and there are a whole bunch of things that we're all in agreement about that happened to disadvantage the Black community. The reality of the financial analysis is if this was in the Pearl District or somewhere else in the city of Portland, there still would be an equity infusion and philanthropy if we wanted to have community benefit, like we're talking about with some of these uses. So your point is well taken about the reasons why and how the Black community has been harmed in this neighborhood. And I guess I would just offer that the financial realities of how we get these kinds of uses anywhere in the city of Portland would require philanthropy and equity.
So you understand, Candace, the delta would be nowhere near what we're talking about relative to this particular project. The delta, the gap between what African Americans experience versus the Pearl District, even if you apply the equity lens to it in the same way, would be nowhere near what we're talking about today.
Yes, your point is well taken. I think that is great information for our state and city partners as we think about building projects that have equity at the forefront and how we tell the story of that. Mr. Posey, I always appreciate you. I'm going to go to Leslie. I saw your hand, Mr. Washington, and then to Dr. Richard.
Good afternoon, everyone. For some reason, my camera's not working, so that's why I'm not on camera. I wanted to just say a couple things. So since I joined the HAAB, and I have said over and over again to ODOT, to everybody that's listening, I wanted to know where the money was going to come from to pay for the development. How were we going to build all these fabulous things on the cover? And if the expectation was that we had to find the money, then what you're saying, I understand capital stacks. I work for the Housing Bureau. I see, pro formas every day where nonprofit organizations have to fundraise or find investors in order to get a building built. I know that's what's going on. You know, Williams and Russell, they're doing an amazing job of finding people that are willing to fund that project outside of the city. You know, the same thing with Albina Vision and with Albina One. They are doing an amazing job of finding money to build. And that's what that equity and philanthropy is, so that we can have lower rents and affordable housing. We have to find additional subsidy, or a nonprofit has to find additional subsidy in order to have the rents at 40% or 50% rather than the 60%, because we know that most people of color aren't making enough money to afford a 60% unit, so they're rent burdened. And so that comes from equity, that comes from philanthropy, that comes from fundraising. It's not coming from the rents. It doesn't come from the money that they get to operate the building. That's why most affordable housing, they're never in the black. They're always in the red because they don't make enough money off of rents. So I really feel like we've not been taking this at the cost of construction and operating, and we've not baked that into the conversations of how much it costs to build a building and then maintain it and have affordable rents for minority folks to be able to, or for Black folks to be able to rent space or have a restaurant or whatever that is. That takes subsidy, that takes equity, that takes somebody saying, you know what, I'm going to put my money in here, even though I may not make any money on it. So I understand what Mr. Posey's saying. I hear what he's saying, but I do see this all over the city. In the Pearl, it actually is more, because the rents in the Pearl could be much more money. In, you know, Southeast, it might be a little bit less because the rents out in Southeast are a little bit less, or out in Rockwood or other places in town. But this is prime real estate here in Northeast Portland. We all know that right now. And so if we built this building and we were going to do market rate, we could make money hand over fist, but that's not the point of this. The point of this is to provide opportunities for affordable rents, for small businesses, for other organizations to be able to have a space. And it's going to take us raising some money in order to see this come to fruition. And I know everybody's not going to agree with me, and that's okay. My feelings aren't going to be hurt, but I just needed to say that this has been coming for a long time, and I'm just glad that we finally got some numbers that we can operate from.
Leslie, thank you. Mr. Washington, and then to Dr. Richard and JT, I see your hand as well. Mr. Washington? I'm going to come back to my good friend, Mr. Washington.
No, I'm good. Somebody,
you
can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
I was chomping at the bit when I started hearing James speak. For a minute there, it sort of got me a little bit uncomfortable, but at the same time, I like to tell the facilitators, thank you. I think that you sort of simplified the situation for me. And, because now it's on the ground, the rubber's on the ground. So I totally support Leslie's view of it, because like I said, I've been a developer for, something for profit and for things for nonprofit. And either one of them requires, support, but I wanted to ask the facilitator a question as to how did they arrive at some of the buildings that they didn't believe would sustain. There's going to be two parts to this. Did you look at that model from a framework of thinking that business did not generate money versus it did generate money? Was there that lens looked at the ones that you felt that couldn't sustain themselves?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Mr. Washington. Yeah, absolutely. We modeled those as generating revenue. just not enough to cover the cost of the debt service. So that we understand that they will be generating money, but not enough. And so that's why it's in that second category of partial cost recovery is kind of how we term that.
Right. So there was an assumption that those businesses couldn't generate more money. Is that what I'm hearing you say also?
Not that they couldn't. I think we were just trying to look at not the business itself being profitable, that the rents that would be charged are commensurate with community-facing organizations below where the market is. And those businesses themselves, I think, ideally are profitable because of that below market rent, rather than being extracting maximum market rent such that those businesses can't thrive and generate wealth. So I think that's really that trade-off that we tried to model, rather than something that's just a purely market rate exercise.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But on the flip side, you know, the part that James is talking about and listening to your response was sort of something that I started seeing about 2 years ago when I had to speak to affordable housing in relationship to small business. You know, when you're standing in the room speaking about affordable housing, and the minute you start talking about somehow or another supporting small business and enterprise, it somehow or another was a conundrum or something. Like it hit an intersection to where somebody hit the mute button, you know, and because it almost seems like society doesn't really they want to always be in the position of philanthropy. Okay, but when it talks about sustainability and self-efficiency and self-fulfillment, this whole conversation gets changed. So when you start looking at something that could compete with the status quo, such as small business, and we all know that it provides 80% of the federal revenue that we basically are using for some of these affordable housing, I can see how this conversation gets a little crazy. But this last part of this question goes, hey, when you talk about equity, you're talking about the equity that comes after the construction occurs, or are you talking about equity beforehand?
The equity is well, if I'm getting the nuance of your question, like pre-construction equity and funding the cost of construction. So it's both of those things. It would be whatever pre-development costs there are, and then as we get into the construction draw, that debt and equity are together covering the cost of construction.
But upon completion,
there
is an equity,
that's
right?
where we have the subsidy would be only needed in those program uses. In the two categories, in the first one, the operating revenues cover that cost. In the second one, I wouldn't necessarily term that as equity. That's probably more like philanthropy, where you would need some ongoing revenue stream, philanthropic or otherwise, public-private partnership, whatever that might be, on an annual basis. That the equity is just a one-time cost of construction contribution only.
Right. And something like the Philharmonic Hall or something like that, or that thing in Philadelphia, they get the support that they need each year from fundraising and all that to be able to provide institutions of art and all that kind of stuff. So it's not to say that those things couldn't support themselves and sustain through the philanthropic reality, right?
All those types of stuff we talked about, that is very common. That is the rule with almost no exception.
Okay, so that doesn't make that one a high risk category. So it just sounded like it was pending doom based on what you were saying. But the last part that I wanted to ask you about, or to see if you can do this for me, can you add up all the numbers for me of the total cost of construction of all the structures in which we've said that we would like to build, and give me a final number on the construction cost?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as a team, we kicked around a lot, knowing that typically that is something we absolutely do, is say, okay, let's look at that cumulatively. I think the reason we didn't do that are many, one of which is this was a selection of only 5. And so this isn't a complete program. It's meant to be representative of a range of things, not the entirety of any program. And so the slides are there. I think someone could add those numbers up, but then it wouldn't necessarily be representative of the entirety of what that program would be. And so we didn't want to put that out there as a number that's then anchored on and referenced when it's not really the entirety of the whole. And so I don't have even an answer of what the entirety of the whole would be, because we picked 5 of many more than 5 possibilities.
Well, that question there made your jaw a whole lot more than the rest of them did. But let me ask you this question. Say the total cost of all of those projects was less than $400 million.
Yeah.
Would you assume that would be
Yes.
probably? So the number is real. Okay. I mean, the bottom line is it's not a number that obviously the numbers that we've been tossing around is something that's not attainable. So I do appreciate you sharing this with me again, and I do appreciate the way you broke it down and you in the path in which you chose. Now it gave me some options. So, but I do believe that this is a project that I think that I do appreciate you showing us that it's possible.
Thank you. Indeed, appreciate all your insight, Mr. Washington, your questions. Dr. Richard, and then to JT.
Thank you so much, my good friend. I'm going to apologize beforehand. I think I got like 8% on my phone battery. So here's what I'll say. After hearing the presentation about equity and philanthropy, it's, at least in my mind, equity plus philanthropy is not equating to racial justice or restorative justice. And when we first started this project, we really talked about how restorative justice was going to be at the forefront. So, question is, how at this point in the project, how are we now defining restorative justice as it relates directly to this problem?
Great question.
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. I think, Dr. Richard, I don't know that our definition of restorative justice has changed from the one that we established with this HAAB when we kicked off the work. I think there's a number of different entities that play a different role in how we achieve the restorative justice piece. So, for ODOT, one of the tangible ways that we're doing that is, we're building the highway cover structure. We're rebuilding that like physical connection and creating that new community space across I-5. We're partnered with the city of Portland, kind of as our land use entity, and Patricia, feel free to jump in, but kind of to help us get to that future development on top, kind of in line with the scenario that's been explored. We've got our community partners, HAAB included, and our community partners at Albina Vision Trust, and looking at, future governance opportunities and land ownership opportunities. And I'm sure as we continue to progress, there will be more partnerships built along the way. And so I think, again, I don't know that our definition has changed, but I think it's just really in recognition of the different roles that each partner plays as we move this forward.
So are these different roles that the partners play, are they now becoming barriers to restorative justice?
I definitely think that they could, Dr. Richard, and it's going to be our part of our charge is to hold those folks accountable. And as Leslie mentioned, I think to think about how the community rallies together to raise some of those funds, right? But I hear your point. I don't know if JT's comments or others could shape into them. I absolutely feel like they could be. I don't know that this group could answer that, but I
think my last point is this. We're asking the same community that was harmed to now turn around and help raise money to restore something that was stolen. So I'm having issues with that.
Understood.
It's not resonating with me, because had I understood that we were going to ask the harmed community to help raise money, I think that would have gave me a totally different understanding as to how I participated with this particular entity. But I stopped, and I think JT was about to chime in. Thank you so much, Erica, for allowing me to ask a couple of questions.
Indeed, appreciate that. JT?
Yeah, a few points, and apologies for being off camera here. Well, I mean, there's I raised my hand maybe a few minutes ago, and there's a ton that's being said since then. So I'll try to just draw a through line to the best of my ability. The first thing I wanted to elevate and amplify. I'm sorry, my dog just barked in the not barked, he burped in the background. That was quite embarrassing. But the first thing I wanted to elevate and amplify was to this question of wealth building. It's really important what Mike said about um, the subsidized rents actually giving businesses and business owners an opportunity to turn a profit and to build capacity on a business level. That's an economic development tool for us as a community. So even if we have to raise money on the front end to make that possible for folks, it's well worth the lift and well worth the effort. The second is to this point of, you know, uh, the upholding the principles of restorative justice. I think sometimes in these conversations we can lose sight of um, the charge of the HAAB in particular, and the relationship between the HAAB and ODOT. And I think as Megan spoke to really briefly, and we've talked about a number of times in the past, um, this is the reason we held these workshops for HAAB and COAC members over the summer, right? Because the conversation about highway cover design and the conversation about actually building the highway cover, they're related, but they are sequenced at different stages. And this right now, this entity is meant to really amplify and elevate those principles of restorative justice through the construction of the cover. So, there are really concrete ways that we could do that. Um, and to me, that spills over into this conversation because, the way that we lay a literal foundation for what can be built on top of the cover will shape the long-term longevity and wealth building tools that we have at our disposal on top of the cover. But the design of the cover itself and the things that get built on top of it won't be built by ODOT. They're not going to be built by this government agency. So that's, I think, important to remind ourselves of. And then that leads me to, second to last point here. At the outset of this whole process, right, we go back to the independent cover assessment and all those good things. It was made really clear that the eventual development of the cover should be stewarded by a community-led development corporation, right, or something of the like, a community-based developer that could very explicitly center the generational well-being and economic, social, and just human prosperity of the folks who were pushed out of the district to begin with and everything that gets built on top of the cover. That is what we as an organization over at the Albina Vision Trust have been fighting for from the outset of this process, and what we are continuing to try to advance through our work and our partnership, not just with the HAAB, not just with the COAC, not just with ODOT, but with the community more broadly, as we advocate at the federal level to bring more money into the project, as we advocate at the state level to try to get this thing fully funded so that we can actually see this dream, this community-led dream realized. And I think that leads me to the last thing I'll say here, and I'm sorry if I'm rambling a little bit, which is that, when we talk about like what Leslie was putting her thumb on, which is this notion that one, it's not atypical for projects to have to lean on philanthropy in order to make projects like this pencil. I think we should also remind ourselves that this highway cover in particular is part of a broader resurgence and redevelopment that is not just an 8-acre redevelopment, but it's nearly 100-acre redevelopment of the historic anchor point of our community that's gained a national reputation for being at the cutting edge of what this emerging field of restorative redevelopment can look like. What that means for us in the most practical terms as a community is that we will be better able to raise capital because we are showing consistently what's possible when we pull partners from every nook and cranny of all these like silos into the same conversation and get folks mutually invested in the generational well-being of our people. So a long way of saying thank you so much to the Echo team for pulling all this information together. I really second what Leslie was saying, what Mr. Washington was saying, what Mr. Posey was saying. This is super helpful to be able to lean on these numbers and see them. And yeah, I feel really, really excited coming off the back of this conversation about what's now possible. And it gives us something concrete to start to build off of as we start to imagine, what this project, what this cover, what this area of the city could look like 10, 15 years from now.
Well, JT, I wish I was as hopeful, inspirational, and aspirational as you, but I'm not. Because for me, and I'm going to turn this back to you, Erica, we'll have a conversation about restorative justice. And at least from my perspective, there's something else added or something else that gets added to the conversation that gives the appearance that we have to rely on so many different parameters in order to achieve restorative justice. And that's why I asked the question, has the definition changed? I was given an answer, not so sure that answer is satisfactory to me, but I guess the only thing I can do is wait and see. And if that's the answer, that we got to wait and see, I would rather have that as an answer rather than an answer of inspiration, aspiration, and hope. I mean, what I'm looking for is some concrete things here.
Can I chime in there super briefly, Erica?
You can.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. I just, I think if I'm speaking as candidly as possible, if the history of this work over the course of our community's existence has taught us anything, it is that if we want this type of work to unfold in a way that really and truly benefits our most marginalized communities, we have to take full agency and lead the work ourselves, and we have to pull partners, whether they be public partners or otherwise, into that work. But I think that we'd be hard pressed to just say, hey, this was stolen from the community, give it back and get what we want. And I actually think the process of the highway cover conversation is really illustrative of that. Like, if we think back to the way this project came together in 2017 versus where it's at now, I mean, it's night and day. It didn't start out with a benevolent desire to heal and reconnect the Black community. It started out with a desire to expand a highway system and clear the 28th worst bottleneck in the United States of America. It took community stepping into the fray and saying, you're not touching the highway without addressing the harm that you caused. And then it took an entire process that unfolded over the course of years where community had to say, footbridges aren't enough, we need a buildable cover, right? And then now we're at the point where we're saying, and what we build on that cover really matters. And of course, I think as we start to move years down the road, it's going to evolve, exactly to the points you're getting to, Dr. Richard, which is, okay, well, where's the capital coming from to make this possible? Who is invested in the process of raising that capital alongside us? But I think that there's a great deal, not just of power in us taking agency over that process, but also it's a capacity building exercise for us that will enable us, in my mind, this is the reason I'm hopeful, enable us to not just learn, but truly concretize the skill set necessary to do this type of work at scale across our communities nationally. I mean, this is not a story that's unique to Portland or unique to the state of Oregon. So this is a problem confronting Black folks, brown folks, and folks who've been pushed out of their historic anchor points all over the country. So I don't know. I get why you're not as hopeful as I am, but I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of power in us stepping into our agency and processes like these.
Thank you, JT. I appreciate it. I see two more hands before we move forward. Mr. Washington and then Mr. Posey. Mr. Washington? I definitely will come back to you. Mr. Posey?
Yeah, I just want to say that I agree with, I just want to see, that I agree with with JT, that we need to be hopeful, but I think it matters how we get there. I think it matters. I think it matters lest we repeat how we got here. So we have to understand that structurally, it's fine to get an outcome, but if the outcome is not sustainable and it does not reflect how we got to where we are, and if we don't correct the systems and the approaches and the policies that got us here in the first place, we're spitting in the wind, so to speak, and it's not sustainable. That's my point. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to let you guys go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mr. Washington?
Yeah, it was. This is a very exciting conversation. I think that, and I would agree. I don't agree with JT very much, but I'd agree with him about this piece. Is that that this should be one of those kinds of conversations we should be having at depth, in a quarter about. But what I see is what I'm hearing it match up to is one person is speaking cognitively about the potential and the possibility for the future, and the other one is still experiencing emotional response to the injustice. Now, what's kind of fascinating for me is right now listening to that debate and that issue, and what it formulates in my head is it comes down to some simple equation: is do I want a hand up or a hand out, right? And as when I look at this sense of what justice is, and it becomes a conversation as to what does this justice really look like. Now, is justice a fishing pole or fish? The ability to be able to do these things, and so for me, it's just a question of what we come to agree is what we want. I mean, because like when we were talking about this whole reparations reality, and for one odd reason, then people started asking me, Senator James Manning, about what does that look like to you? And when I said to them, it looked like, having the same fishing and hunting rights as the Native Americans in this country, a lot of people go, oh, well, we didn't think about that part of it. Well, to me, that's justice, right? That's that kind of the stuff that I'm looking for. And looking at this project, the question still remains is that we got a sense from these people of what the cost would be to do something like that. Now, to have the conversation about where the money is going to come from is another conversation. But at least we can see that there is a target or a potential for something to do. Now, I believe that this whole conversation that Doc is talking about is about the money that's going to help us get there. And maybe in this conversation, that story is not going to be told. But I think that we could acquiesce ourselves into a space, and I think maybe that conversation could possibly lead us somewhere. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you. Mr. Posey, did you have another comment? I see a note from you, Bryson, in the comments. I appreciate all of the dialogue around restorative justice and would just put into the space that there are a lot of entities that owe restoration to the community, right? This is not, and again, not to take the responsibility away from our colleagues and partners as we work on the Rose Quarter project. But again, to repeat, as JT stated, we are in the process of moving forward with a cover connected to benevolence that we didn't have in the past, in the original design. But there is still the city of Portland, there's still the county, there is Legacy Emmanuel Hospital, there are other state agencies and our lawmakers and folks in the city who also have responsibility in regards to restoration of the Black community. And I trust that this group will continue to hold all of those agencies accountable. And don't let me forget Metro and others who have a responsibility to do the right thing as we dive forward in creating a project that is truly restorative. And so I appreciate all of the dialogue and comments around this. This, for me, is an exciting place as we have been having conversations, and I think being reported out to, but this is the opportunity for us to collectively leverage all of your expertise and passion in creating the community that we want to see. So thank you again to the ECHO team for your work here. I know this is just the beginning, the tip of the iceberg for what feasibility and the resources that would be needed to build that community vision alongside and in collaboration with community values. As we move forward in the meeting, I want to invite Nicholas Starn from our city team to give an update in regards to the Reconnecting Albina Plan project. And again, as JT mentioned, there are so many components that are tying together in regards to this work, whereas the cover and the Rose Quarter project really is, it may not seem like it, but it is a small piece of what the community is working towards. So Nicholas, I'm going to turn it over to you to give us an update in regards to the RAP program.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Again, my name is Nicholas Starren. I'm with City of Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. I'm working with Rachel on this project. Rachel couldn't be here tonight. If we could go to the next slide. So today I just have the one slide. This is just going to be a brief update, sort of following along in the vein of the next steps that Patricia and Megan were speaking about. I just wanted to update you on the RAP project, and particularly the work that's going to be going on over the next year, as well as the outreach opportunities, including the HAAB engagement opportunities that we'll be having over the next year, which are highlighted in the slide in red. This fall, the project is working on the existing conditions analysis and a policy review. We have the PINIT tool, the mapping tool that we've talked about in this space is up and running and open to the public. And we have started to get some input on issues and opportunities and assets in the district. But we really would like to see some more activity for that. So I'm going to put the link to the PINIT tool in the chat, and we can get it to you in other ways if that doesn't work. Really encourage members of the HAAB to use that tool as a way to provide input to the RAP project as to your priorities and what the issues are. And really encourage you to also get that link out to your network so that we can get as wide a net of input from the community as possible. So that's this fall. In the winter, the project will have an orientation and kickoff event for the broader district planning effort that the RAP project is. I think it's planned for December or January. We're still planning that event, but HAAB members will be definitely encouraged to participate and engage with that process as will always be the case for the RAP project events. And we'll get you more information as we get closer to that about when and where that event's going to be happening. In the spring, we are planning to have a special HAAB session in April, where we would like to work with you all on urban design details and refinements that will help advance the cover scenario that we've been talking about tonight, that you helped shape this summer in the work that you did with ABT and the COAC. Looking in particular to refine and dig into some of the urban design and public realm details. For instance, looking at the pedestrian experience, how ground floors of buildings relate to sidewalks and streets, the location of building entrances, vehicle access, how the grades affect building placements and access and those sorts of things. So we're really looking forward to that special engagement. As we sort of work on how that's going to work, we'll be getting back to how that event will unfold. We'll be getting back to you. I think that's going to be a fun and exciting way to advance the urban design work for the cover. And of course, in addition, as the HAAB schedule, the regular HAAB schedule for the following year is put together, the RAP team will more than undoubtedly have opportunity to update you. And if questions come up that we'd like the HAAB's input on, come to you during your regularly scheduled meetings. That April will be a special meeting outside of the regular scheduled events. In the summer and fall of 2025, the project will be hosting a number of public engagement activities. These are in the early stages of being planned, but could focus, for example, on city streets, or hone in on key development opportunity sites, for instance, the waterfront or the parking garage properties. But as I say, those are still in the early stages of events. And as always, the HAAB will be informed of those well in advance, and will strongly encourage you to come to those events and participate and engage with those activities. This is just showing the next year at a very high level of what we expect to be doing and the opportunity to have. The grant, the planning project and the grant extends through summer of 2026. So following all this and the development of sort of project documents and reports, there'll be a city adoption process where we work with the city's planning commission and the city council to adopt land use and transportation policy and code changes that might be needed. And that's a ways down the line, and we'll certainly update you as we go forward.
Nicholas, just wanted to point out, oh, sorry, that there was a question about the Pin It tool and how long it'll be up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the Pin It tool. I don't have a definitive date, but my understanding is it'll definitely be up at least until the beginning of December, but I believe it'll be up longer than that. So we have some time. I don't think anyone from the RAP team is here right now that can correct me, but I will say no, it'll certainly go down no later than the beginning of December. But I'll get a definitive answer to that question and get that through to you all through the project team.
Thanks. I'd like to get it out to, we've got about 6,000 people on our e-blast list at the Housing Bureau for Northeast. And I'd like to give them an opportunity to get it through our newsletter or to do it e-blast. So
yeah,
you can let me know how long.
Wonderful. So I'll make that a priority so that we can be real clear in those communications about when folks need to get their comments in. Thank you for that.
Thank you. JT, I think I saw your hand raised.
Yeah. Just want to emphasize, for folks who aren't clear on the RAP, Reconnecting Albina plan project, that's the original $800,000 grant that AVT brought in the door for district-wide planning work. So we'll be leading all the engagement throughout that process. We're also leading several other components of the partnership with the city here. So y'all can direct questions to us as well. But again, we'll make sure that on an individual level, everybody here is aware of all the stuff going on, and you guys have a chance to not only pull up but offer feedback and share thoughts as we go through the process. And that's true now. It's also true. Of course, this is a multi-year process, so it'll even be true post the HAAB sunsetting.
Thank you for that. We appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Nicholas. Next slide, please. Actually, we could probably, yes, pull the slides down and just go back to the full screen. I want to thank you all for a really productive conversation. Thank you to the Echo Northwest team for their work and for HAAB members leaning into that really authentic conversation. It really is an exciting place for us as we move the conversation forward, even just the dialogue that we're having and helping to hold our agencies and state and electeds accountable to that ideal of restoration and how we create a city and a state that really is inclusive for all of us. I want to remind you all that this is our last meeting of 2024, that we will early in November be sending out to you all the 2025 schedule. Megan did mention to you all there potentially 8 engagements scheduled, but as Nicholas and JT mentioned, there will be ongoing engagement around that Reconnecting Albina plan, which is tightly knit and woven to the Rose Quarter project that will give you opportunity to lean into all of the other work that is happening and give input and your institutional knowledge with the Rose Quarter and how it ties into the rest of the work will be greatly needed and appreciated. So please make sure to be on the lookout for that and avail yourself to those opportunities to continue to connect around the Albina revitalization and an opportunity for us to leave a lasting mark on a community that we love and that we want to see reflect who we are and our community values. I'll invite Dr. Holt to close us out of this meeting tonight. Again, thank you to the team for their diligence in helping us to prepare. We're excited about the upcoming topics in 2025. And again, around the 1st of November, you should receive the schedule for 2025 as we continue the work together. Dr. Holt?
Thank you. Thanks, Erica, for your excellent facilitation. As always, what a reflection of the nuanced work that we're involved in and how important it is to have the voices of this community at the table. I want to just commend the HAAB again for just being the people that you are, and being thoughtful and bringing the authenticity of your experience, your history, your voice into this work. Without you and without this effort, this would be a very, very different project. So what a great opportunity for us to do some meaningful work. It is the last meeting for us. We're headed into the fall and further into the fall, and it is fundraising season. For those of us who are invited to the various spaces, I'm sure we'll see each other out and about in community. Take care of yourselves. Continue to do the great work that you do. Thanks for your investment and your time. And we'll see each other in 2025. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.